Is Jake Paul a real boxer? This question might seem obvious, but there's actually been a ton of discourse surrounding the subject. Jake Paul made his pro boxing debut in 2020 against Anderson Silva, knocking him out in the first round. This was the second professional boxing match put on by YouTubers, the first being the KSI vs Logan Paul rematch. Even though the fight was short, Jake Paul showed signs of being at a higher level compared to most YouTube boxers at that point. He was being trained by Sugar Shane Mosley at the time, and if anyone understands boxing on a higher level, it's Shane Mosley. Jake went on to knock out Nate Robinson in devastating fashion on the Mike Tyson vs Roy Jones undercard. People were starting to notice that Jake had power in his hands. That being said, Gibb and Nate basically ran into Jake's shots, dropping them in the process. Ben Askren was Jake Paul's next victim, and even though he was an Olympian and a great MMA fighter, he didn't have any boxing ability. It didn't help that he was almost 40 years old and had a hip replacement. Ben was knocked out by Jake in the first round, and this time, Jake's opponent didn't run into the punch trying to pressure him. This was a clean technical knockout, and it was at that point where MMA pundits started to really take notice of Jake Paul. Jake's first real challenge, I'd say, was Tyron Woodley, who did have some power in his hands, but he was most known for being a wrestler during his UFC tenure. Tyron was also quite a bit smaller than Jake. The first fight went to a decision, and then when they had their rematch, Jake knocked him out cold. Jake had glaring flaws that anybody could pick up on in both fights against Tyron. He had limited footwork, he ran out of gas it seemed in both fights, and his work rate was piss poor. After two cancelled bouts against Tommy Fury and Hasim Rahman Jr., none of which were Jake's fault by the way, he opted to face Anderson Silva. Now I remember myself and other combat sports fans predicting that Anderson would either win on points or Jake would knock him out. Both of those didn't end up happening. Surprisingly enough, Jake won a decision over Anderson Silva. Jake's performance was pretty damn good, improving a lot of his overall game, and this is where we get into the video's title. Jake Paul is a real novice boxer. He's actually ranked on BoxRec if you can believe it. When Anderson Silva beat Chavez Jr., he earned a rank, and later when Jake defeated Anderson, Jake got that same rank. It's fucking insane that a YouTuber who started his pro boxing career 3 years ago is now ranked. Anyway, I know the arguments that people will make to discredit Jake and label him not a real boxer. Trust me, my dad and I go back and forth on this topic like every other day. Jake Paul hasn't fought a real pro boxer. Well, if you want to get technical, Anderson Silva had a 3-1 record before the Jake matchup. I do understand what people mean though. As much as Jake likes to claim that he's a real boxer, he's actually never beaten a full-time pro boxer. Well, to defend him a bit, what does that term even mean? Pineda was a full-time pro boxer and KSI beat him. Does that make KSI more of a real boxer than Jake? Pineda was more of a journeyman, of course, but every Hall of Fame boxer's first 5 or 6 opponents are journeymen. Even though Jake's opponents are not traditional pro boxers, they are harder fights than whoever the fuck Canelo fought in his first couple of matches. Pro boxer is such a nebulous term anyway. As long as you got a pro boxing license, you're technically a pro boxer. Jake fighting the likes of Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva is infinitely more entertaining than him knocking out some journeyman scrub in 30 seconds. Yes, they're MMA fighters, but they still pose more of a risk than a full-time boxing journeyman who was being paid to lose. As for fans wanting Jake to fight someone younger, I completely agree. That being said, Anderson Silva would beat Tommy Fury up, without question. Once Jake fights someone like Tommy Fury, he shouldn't go back to fighting old MMA guys. He needs to continue challenging himself in the ring. I think it's totally fair to say that Jake Paul is an inexperienced boxer or not a good boxer by any stretch, but the argument isn't about quality, it's about validity. And this sport is his full-time thing now. He is putting real time into real training and getting real results. If it's not about the quality of opponents that make you a pro boxer, it must be about the training or dedication. Well, Jake is very dedicated and currently trains like a pro boxer. He has all the funds in the world to train like that, so I do expect these kind of results, but still, he's training and sparring with real boxers. Jake Paul didn't come from a boxing family or has been putting on gloves since he was a kid. To be fair though, neither did Deontay Wilder. He started pretty late compared to most other great boxers actually, but his power alone got him through to the Olympic Games. Jake Paul isn't a traditional boxer. He used his fame and fortune to kickstart his boxing career, which is a far cry from some of the success stories we've had in the sport. Also, he's never fought a full-time pro boxer, but he will against Tommy Fury, and when he knocks him spark out inside like 4 rounds, we should all be saying Jake the novice boxer as opposed to Jake the Disney star who picked up boxing as a hobby. Most boxing fans don't like Jake's cocky attitude and hope he gets chinned. That's fair enough, that's completely understandable. There are things to criticize Jake Paul for, and you can poke holes in his boxing ability all day long. However, to say he's not a real boxer is such a weird complaint and doesn't really mean a whole lot at the end of the day, especially when he has full capability to knock out pro boxers. People always say, well, he can't beat any of the top 10 cruiserweights. Yeah, no shit, he's still 6 fights in. With no amateur background, Jake Paul is the definition of learning on the job. I would love to see him fight a boxer inside the top 200 cruiserweights. It's a pretty shallow division, and there's most likely some random journeyman he can beat up. I find it fascinating to see where Jake Paul ends up next. It's a great experiment, and I'm fully dialed in on his showdown against Tommy Fury.